Is this really how it ends? The question lived in my throat that morning like ice. The marble floor under my bare feet was so cold it felt medicinal, and the little white stick in my hand had 2 pink lines on it that changed everything before I had even learned how to breathe around them. Elena DeSantis was 24, a paper conservator in Palermo, and she had never been reckless with her life. Her plan had been painfully simple: survive the arranged marriage, keep her brother alive, and leave the heart of the Salvatore empire untouched. Then Dante Salvatore stepped into her life and turned survival into something far more dangerous. I thought I understood the terms of being his wife. I thought a quiet house, a locked wing, and one loveless wedding night were the worst of it. Then I heard his silver lighter click through the study door. Then I heard my Mafia husband say 6 words that made my hand cover my stomach before I even knew I was doing it. If she's pregnant, the baby dies. And for one breathless second, the whole world narrowed to the sound of him deciding whether my child lived at all. Chapter 1. The study door words through oak. The first thing I heard was the lighter. A clean silver click through old oak. Not loud, not dramatic, just small enough to make the rest of the house listen around it. I stood outside Dante's study with the pregnancy test still tucked inside the sleeve of my robe, pressed so hard against my wrist that the plastic edge left a mark. Dawn had not fully entered the villa yet. Palermo was still blue at the edges. The sea beyond the west wall looked like hammered metal, and the long corridor outside his study smelled of beeswax, gun oil, and the burnt orange peel Rosa always left on the radiators in winter. Then Dante's voice came through the door. If she's pregnant, the baby dies. My hand went to my stomach so fast it frightened me. Not because I was showing. I wasn't. 4 weeks wasn't even a curve. Not really. Just a secret and 2 pink lines and a pulse in the back of my throat. But the body knows before the mind catches up. Mine did. It tried to protect something that could still be taken by a sentence. Inside the study, a man said something too low for me to catch. Dante answered in the same calm tone. No exceptions. That calm was the worst part of him. Not when he raised his voice. He rarely did. It was the way he could say something final without changing shape at all, like a door closing on a room you had not realized you were standing inside. My marriage to Dante Salvatore was 10 weeks old. 10 weeks of separate rooms, 10 weeks of cold silk sheets in the east wing, 10 weeks of learning where not to stand when his men moved through the hallways, 10 weeks of understanding that power had a sound, and it sounded a lot like silence. We had shared a bed exactly once, on our wedding night, because the commission needed proof the marriage between the Salvatore family and the disgraced DeSantis name was legitimate. Duty, not tenderness. A lock clicking into place. And now there was a child. I should have gone back to my room. I knew that. I should have folded around the secret and kept it breathing a little longer. Instead, I opened the study door. The room was all dark wood and low lamplight. A long table. 3 men standing. 1 kneeling. Dante sat at the head. 1 ankle over the opposite knee, his silver lighter open in 1 hand. The flame lit the edge of his knuckles and the scar that cut across the base of his thumb. He wore a black shirt with the sleeves turned once. No tie, no jacket. His face looked carved from the same patience as the furniture. The kneeling man had blood on his mouth. Everyone turned to me. Even the blood seemed to pause. Dante did not rise. He looked first at my face, then at the hand still resting over my stomach, then at the thin white plastic visible where my robe sleeve had shifted. Something changed behind his eyes so quickly I could have imagined it. Out, one of the guards snapped. But Dante kept looking at me. Elena. No one in his house used my first name like that. Not as a word, as a measured act. I should have said I was lost. I should have pretended I had heard nothing. That would have been smarter. Women in stories always had these neat instincts for survival. I never had neat instincts. I had truth when I was frightened, and silence when I was hurt. Did you hear me? He asked. The man kneeling on the carpet whimpered through broken teeth. Smoke curled once from Dante's lighter and dissolved into the room. Somewhere outside, a gull cried over the seawall. I looked at my husband, at the man who had bought my brother's life with a marriage contract and never once asked for gratitude. At the man who had stood beside me in church and touched my waist only when custom required it. At the stranger whose child might already be inside me. Yes, I said. Not a lie, not an excuse, just the truth. Something old and dangerous moved across Dante's face, not anger exactly. Recognition, maybe. Surprise with its teeth in. He closed the lighter with a soft click. Leave us, he told the room. The guards hesitated only long enough to prove they understood what hesitation cost. Then they moved. The kneeling man was dragged out over the carpet, leaving a dark smear that Rosa would later curse in 3 dialects. Another door closed. Then there were only the 2 of us. The blood, the old wood, and the sound of my own pulse trying to be louder than reason. I should have stepped back. I didn't. Dante stood. The whole room changed when he stood. Height was part of it, but not the real part. The real part was the sudden sense that gravity in the room had chosen one body and everyone else was only negotiating with it. He came around the table without haste. His gaze did not leave mine. Who told you to come here? No one. You should have knocked. I didn't know there was a safer way to hear that. His eyes narrowed. I had said the wrong thing. I knew it the second it left me. My mouth always betrayed me most when I was afraid. Still, he stopped 1 step away. Not touching, not crowding. Close enough that I could smell winter on his coat from wherever he had been before dawn, and the cedar dark scent of his cologne underneath it. Close enough that if I lifted my hand, I could have put my fingers on the scar at his thumb and ruined both our mornings. What do you think you heard? He asked. The intelligent answer would have been something cautious. Something that allowed him space to define reality for me. Instead, I reached into my sleeve, took out the pregnancy test, and held it between us with a hand that trembled exactly once. I think, I said, I heard enough. I had never seen Dante Salvatore look unprepared before. It lasted less than a second. His face resettled. The calm returned. But I saw it. Saw the fracture line before it sealed. He took the test from me. His fingers brushed mine. That was all, barely a touch. Yet my whole body registered it with humiliating precision. 2 pink lines. His gaze rested on them, then lifted back to my face. Alina. That was when he said it for the first time. Come here, little truth. Cold. Observational. Almost cruel in its accuracy. I hated that it made my chest tighten. I'm not coming anywhere until you tell me whether I need to run. His jaw flexed once. If you were running, you would have started before you opened that door. That isn't an answer. It's the one you get. I should have slapped him. Cried. Asked what kind of man says those words before sunrise. Instead, I stood there with my hand still curved against my stomach, and he looked at that hand like it had altered the geometry of the room. Then he moved past me to the study door and locked it. The sound was quiet. Final. 1 rule, he said without turning back yet, until I know exactly who heard what in this house. You do not leave this villa. I stared at the brass lock, then at his broad back, then at the silver lighter glinting in his hand. A door had closed, and this one was not opening again. Chapter 2. The West Wing Rules for a Wife. I had been Dante Salvatore's wife for 10 weeks before I understood that there were different kinds of prisons. The obvious kind had locks, heavy doors, men outside them pretending not to be guards. The subtler kind had breakfast trays delivered on silver, fresh flowers cut from the south garden, and a walk-in wardrobe full of clothes you never chose yourself. The subtler kind said protection, until the word became difficult to distinguish from permission. By noon, the villa knew, not the pregnancy. Dante had said nothing about that after the study. Not really. Dr. Bianca Moretti had been sent to my room, where she took blood, asked exact questions in an exact voice, and avoided looking curious even once. I respected her for that. In this house, curiosity seemed like something people got trained out of young. What the villa knew was that I was no longer permitted beyond the west wing without escort. "It's temporary," Bianca said while securing the band around my arm. "That is what people say about wars and bad governments too." She almost smiled. "Almost. You should rest." "Did he tell you what I heard?" "No." "Did he tell you what he meant?" Her eyes met mine then. Gray, intelligent, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "Elena, in this house, meaning usually arrives after damage. I suggest patience." "That sounds like a threat." "It sounds," she said, packing her things, like experience. After she left, I tried pacing, then reading, then not thinking. None of it worked. The afternoon settled over the villa in bands of gold and silence. Somewhere below, men crossed the courtyard with the crisp economy of people used to carrying weapons under jackets that cost too much. I stood at the window and thought about the tiny life inside me and the 6 words inside my head, and the fact that fear had a way of repeating itself until it sounded like truth. At 4, there was a knock. Not the polite kind. 3 quick taps, and 1 dramatic sigh before I had even answered. The man who entered carried a garment bag in one hand and a plate in the other. He was in his 30s, slim where Dante was solid, with a face that looked built for confession and gossip in equal measure. His dark hair was too careful to be accidental. "Signora," he said, placing the plate on the console table, "I bring civilian clothing and boiled chicken, which means the boss loves you in the saddest way possible." I blinked. He put a hand over his heart. "Paolo Rizzi, driver, security coordinator, unwilling martyr to Dr. Moretti's cholesterol regulations." On the plate sat exactly what he had promised. Chicken. Plain. Beside it, 3 steamed green beans arranged with insulting optimism. "I'm pregnant, not dying. Try telling them that." He lowered his voice and leaned closer. "Rosa cried because she wasn't allowed to give you tiramisu. Actual tears. Then she threatened to kill all of us and let God sort the ashes against every instinct I had cultivated since marrying into this house." I laughed. It escaped before I could stop it. Short, startled, real. Paolo pointed at me like I had done something important. "Excellent. There she is. Human. I was worried they had turned you into one of the marble busts in the east hallway." He moved toward the wardrobe and unzipped the garment bag with ceremony. Inside was a dark green wool dress, modest and beautiful, and exactly the sort of thing I would have chosen if I were trying not to be seen choosing anything. "Where am I going?" "Downstairs. The boss wants you at dinner. I thought I was a security risk. You are. So are all the rest of us. Difference is, you are also his wife." I didn't answer that. I was still trying to decide what wife meant when your husband locked doors and declined explanations like they were beneath him. Paolo glanced at the boiled chicken and shuddered. "If I die before 40, bury me face down so Rosa can't feed me in the afterlife." "You're afraid of carbohydrates?" "I'm in love with carbohydrates," he said bleakly. "I'm afraid of Dr. Moretti and my own blood work. Also Rosa Esposito, but in a more spiritual sense. Rosa is the cook?" He sighed the sigh of a doomed man. "Rosa is the reason I still believe in heaven." By the time he left, I was holding the green dress and thinking that maybe even in a house like this laughter found a way to survive by lowering itself under the furniture and waiting. Dinner was in the smaller dining room, not the formal one. That unsettled me more than the chandeliers would have. Formality, I understood. Intimacy was harder. Dante was already there when I entered. He stood near the fireplace, speaking softly to Tommaso Greco, the head of his logistics arm and, as far as I could tell, the only man in Palermo permitted to interrupt him without first making peace with God. Tommaso was younger than Dante, rougher around the edges, with a broken nose and kind eyes that did not belong in this house, but had survived there anyway. When he saw me, he straightened. "Signora." "Tommaso," Dante turned. His gaze moved once over the dress Paolo had brought, then to my face. No comment. No visible reaction. That, with him, was sometimes worse than anger. Dinner itself was absurdly normal. Fish. Bread I was apparently allowed to eat if I wanted to scandalize Paolo. Wine only for the men. Dante spoke little. Tommaso gave updates on port shipments. An accountant in Catania, a judge who had suddenly discovered scruples at an inconvenient hour. It was the shape of domesticity, but the edges were all wrong. The room was warm. The conversation was about extortion. When Tommaso left, taking the security reports with him, I reached for my water glass and found Dante watching my hand. "You should be resting. I do a great deal of resting now. I'm becoming excellent at it." The faintest shift at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Not kindness. Something more dangerous because it wanted to become both. "I meant," he said, "you should not be standing in doorways listening to conversations you don't understand." I understood enough. His eyes sharpened. "No. You decided enough." A flush rose under my skin. "Then explain it." Silence. The fireplace cracked softly behind him. He set down his glass and came around the table. Not fast. Never fast. The whole point of Dante was that he never needed to rush. He stopped beside my chair. One hand rested on the carved wood behind me, the other at his side. He could have touched my hair, my throat, the pulse that had started leaping there the second he crossed the room. He didn't. That restraint did something ugly and beautiful to me. "You want the truth?" he asked. "Yes, there is a leak inside my house," I waited. "I will close it. That isn't the same truth. It's the one that matters tonight." I stood too quickly, anger doing what fear had not. The chair legs scraped the floor. "You keep saying that like I'm too delicate for the rest." His gaze dropped briefly to my stomach. Barely there. Still enough to make heat and panic collide in me. "You are carrying something that did not ask to be part of this," he said. "So yes. Tonight, delicacy matters. It should have comforted me. Instead, it made my eyes sting. You don't get to sound careful after what I heard." His hand tightened once on the back of the chair, then loosened. There it was again, the stopping. The visible decision not to push further. "When I decide to explain myself," he said quietly, "it will be because I chose to. Not because you demanded it at my table. That was control. Not volume. Not threats. Just a line placed in the room like stone." I should have answered. Instead, I hated that my body knew exactly how close he was. I hated that safety and danger had begun to smell the same. He stepped back first. "From tonight on," he said, "Paolo or Tommaso escorts you anywhere beyond the West Wing." "And if I refuse?" "You won't." His voice did not rise. It did not need to. Chapter 3. The archive room keep record. 3 days passed before Dante let me leave the West Wing. By then I had begun to understand the rhythms of his house. Men arrived before sunrise and left after midnight. The chapel bell rang at 7 whether anyone prayed or not. Rosa ran the kitchen like a military state with aprons. Paolo wore black suits that made him look leaner than he was and ate almonds out of despair rather than appetite. Tommaso came and went with dock reports, names, and weather on his shoes. And Dante moved through it all like a dark current under a city, mostly unseen, always felt. The pregnancy stayed between my body and the doctor. Bianca confirmed it on the second day in the same dry voice she might have used to report rainfall. 4 weeks, perhaps a little more. I had sat on the edge of the chaise with my hands folded so tightly my knuckles blanched. "Does he know?" Her silence answered before she did. "Yes." I looked away before she could watch the herd arrive. "He told you nothing," she said, not as a question. "No. Then he believes silence is protecting you." "From what?" "From himself, usually." That should have sounded ridiculous. It didn't. On the 4th morning, Tommaso appeared outside my room with a key ring clipped to one finger and a bruise yellowing along his jaw. "The boss says you can work." "Work?" "Where?" He lifted the heaviest key. "Archive room." "South wing." He's got 3 boxes of burned documents and exactly 0 patience left for men who can't read partial ledgers. My chest tightened in spite of myself. Before the marriage, before my brother's debts and the contract and the church and the one cold wedding night, I had worked in a restoration studio near the old port. Paper, vellum, wax seals, water damage, smoke damage, insect loss. Old records gave up secrets if you listened to their injuries carefully enough. The archive room was on the ground floor behind a door I had never seen opened. Tommaso unlocked it and stepped aside. I forgot to breathe. Shelves climbed to the ceiling. Leather spines, deed boxes, climate cabinets, flat files, a central table under clear lamps. The room smelled of dust, cedar, starch paste, and old ink. The smell of my former life, except richer, stranger, full of family histories bought, buried, or blackmailed into paper. There were also 2 armed men by the far wall, which made the nostalgia less complete. Tommaso watched my face soften despite myself. Thought you'd like it. I hate that I do. That seems healthy. On the table lay 3 documents in evidence sleeves and 1 small object wrapped in linen. I reached for the bundle first. Inside was a broken porcelain Madonna, cream and blue, cracked from shoulder to base. Who broke her? I asked. Tommaso scratched the back of his neck. Long story. Paolo backed into the chapel side table during a fire drill. Fire drill? In this house? Every day is a fire drill. In spite of myself, I smiled. Then I looked more closely at the statue. The crack was clean, repairable. There were notes in Dante's hand beside the ledgers. Short, severe, dates, names, possible laundering channels through 2 ports, and a charitable foundation. Even his handwriting had restraint. What am I looking for? Proof someone inside altered numbers before the fire. Tommaso leaned one hip against the shelf. Boss trusts you with paper more than he trusts half his blood relatives with breathing. That surprised me enough to say what I should not have. Why? He considered that. Because paper doesn't flatter him. Neither do you. Before I could answer, the door opened behind us. The room changed temperature. Dante came in without entourage, coat still on, phone in one hand. He ended the call as he crossed to the table. His gaze rested briefly on the porcelain Madonna in my fingers. You can repair that? Yes. Then repair it. It was not a request. Oddly, I did not mind. Work had always sounded better to me in the imperative. I set the statue down and reached for the first ledger page. Smoke damage along the edge, heat-fused surface. Scraped fibers where someone had deliberately erased numbers. I'll need magnification, humidification, and time. You have all 3. I looked up. Time is not something men like you usually have. No, he said. It's something men like me usually take. Tommaso made a small sound in his throat that might have been amusement or prayer, and retreated to the door. I'll send Paolo with coffee. The moment he left, silence settled between Dante and me. Not empty, crowded. I put on gloves, focused on the paper. There was a wire in the study. It wasn't a question. No, he said. I looked up sharply. There were 2, he corrected. My mouth went dry. You let me hear those words. Yes, something in me went rigid enough to hurt. Why? Because only 4 people knew Bianca had run blood work on you, and one of them had already sold information once. I needed the leak to carry something poisonous back to whoever was listening. My hands began to shake, not because I was weak, because anger and relief hit the body like opposite weather. You used me, his face gave nothing. I protected you. You could have told me. And if you had acted differently after knowing, if the wrong person read it in your face? I thought of the study, of the lock, of the way he had watched me say yes, I heard you. I hated that part of me could trace the logic even while the rest wanted to throw a lamp. That doesn't excuse it. No. His gaze dropped to my gloves, to the careful way I held the paper. It does not. That almost apology landed harder than an actual one would have. Because it cost him more. I bent over the ledger before he could see how much my eyes stung. Under angled light, The scraped surface lifted. Faint impressions survived even when ink did not. Someone changed a 7 to a 1 here, I said after a moment. And here. They reduced outgoing totals, probably to hide diverted shipments. Amateur pressure pattern. Confident hand, though. You can identify the writer? Maybe. He was still beside me, not touching, watching with that unnerving stillness of his. I became conscious of everything. The lamp heat on my wrists, the fall of my hair, his breath once through his nose. The almost of him. I reached for the porcelain Madonna to buy myself a different focus. The crack can be filled with a mineral adhesive and powdered gold pigment, I said. If you hide the break completely, the piece stays weak. It needs the fracture acknowledged to hold. Silence. When I finally looked up, Dante was not watching the statue. He was watching me. Understood, he said. Later, after he left, there was a brief pressure valve of another world. Dante. She had said yes in the study when any cleverer woman would have lied. Now she stood under archive lamps with smoke on her gloves and spoke about damage as if survival required honesty to work. That was it. Not her face. Not the child. Not the contract. The truth. She handled ruin without pretending it had not happened, and he had wanted that from the world since Lucia died and never found it once. Not until her. When Paolo arrived with coffee and a plate of illicit almond biscuits from Rosa, he found me with my head bent over altered numbers and a strange steadiness in my chest. Then, halfway through the second ledger, I found something hidden between two warped pages. A shipping code. A meeting location. Tonight. Someone was already moving. Chapter 4. The chapel stair, the first touch. The villa had a private chapel because old Italian families liked to keep God nearby when they were least inclined to obey him. At dusk, the place smelled of wax and stone and old flowers. Rosa had changed the lilies that afternoon, and the sweetness of them fought with incense in the air. I had gone there not because I was devout, but because the archive room had filled my head with names and numbers and proof that every crime eventually wanted to become a document. Also, I had repaired the Madonna. The gold-flecked seam ran from porcelain shoulder to base. Visible. Stronger for being visible. I carried her carefully in both hands toward the side table near the votive wall. "Do not tell me," Paolo said from behind me, "that you personally fixed what I, through a tragic combination of heroism and narrow hallways, destroyed." He stood at the chapel entrance in a suit too expensive for his expression. He was holding a paper cup of black coffee in one hand and a protein bar in the other with the weary disgust of a man accepting spiritual punishment. "You backed into a table during a fire drill," I said. He lifted his chin. "The fire drill was emotionally complex. You were carrying pastries. They were for Rosa." I turned fully then, stunned into a laugh. "That is your great romantic strategy? Smuggling cannoli to the woman trying to keep you alive?" He pressed a hand to his chest. "Do not mock a man's courtship rituals." Before I could answer, Rosa herself appeared with a tray of fresh candles and fixed Paolo with the kind of look that could curdle milk at 20 paces. "You're in my chapel with packaged food," she said. Paolo hid the protein bar behind his back, as if she had caught him with a body. "It's medicinal. So is arsenic." I laughed again, properly this time. Rosa's mouth twitched. Paolo looked absurdly pleased with himself, as if making me laugh had been his assigned duty from the Vatican. Then the chapel door opened, and all lightness went out of the room. Dante entered with Tommaso at his shoulder, both in dark coats, both carrying the night on them. Tommaso paused at the threshold when he saw us and muttered, "Madonna, save me." "It's a family scene." Dante's gaze moved from Paolo's guilty face to the repaired statue in my hands. He came closer. "You finished it, yes." He took the Madonna from me with surprising care, his large hands almost reverent around the repaired porcelain. He turned it once beneath the chapel lamp, his thumb stopping just shy of the gold seam. "It holds?" "Yes, good." There was something strange in his voice, something quieter than approval. Tommaso cleared his throat from the doorway. "Meetings in 20 minutes. Dante did not look at him. "Wait." That single word froze the room more effectively than a shout. He carried the Madonna to the side table and set her down beneath the votive candles. For a second, the chapel flame reflected in the gold line I had sealed, and the crack looked almost deliberate. Beautiful because it had survived being ugly first. Paolo, perhaps sensing emotion and reacting the way all wise men do by trying to ruin it, whispered to Rosa, "If I repaired a saint for you, would you kiss me?" Rosa did not turn her head. "If you repaired yourself, perhaps?" Tommaso made a choking sound. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to stop another laugh from escaping in front of Dante. He turned then, and his gaze caught the exact second I was failing not to smile. That should have embarrassed me. Instead, something warmer and more dangerous moved under my ribs. "I need a word," he said. Paolo and Rosa vanished with comic speed. Tommaso lingered half a second longer, gave me a look that said he was sorry for whatever this was, and disappeared too. The chapel felt suddenly smaller. The silence between me and Dante stretched like a wire. "You restored it well," he said. "You already said that. I'm saying something else now." I looked at him properly. "Are you?" His mouth shifted. Not enough to be called softness. Enough to be human. "I should have told you about the wire before you found out the way you did." There it was. Not an apology dressed up as strategy. Not an explanation. A fact, heavy as one. "You still used me." "Yes." The honesty of that hit harder than an excuse would have. I folded my arms, partly against the cold, mostly against him. "Do you usually confess in chapels?" "No. I usually avoid chapels." That surprised me. Before I could hide it, he saw. "Lucia liked this room," he said. "My sister." He had never spoken of family to me. Not once. The chapel bells from the old quarter rang faintly through the stone. He looked not at me, but at the repaired Madonna over my shoulder, and something tightened in his face so subtly I might have missed it if I had not been learning his silences. "She collected broken things," he said. "Statues. Clocks. Birds with ruined wings. She thought repair was a form of defiance. I didn't know what to do with the tenderness of that, or the grief." "So did you keep them?" I asked softly. "No." His jaw hardened. "I buried most of them." The answer held more than it said. Enough more that I stopped asking. That was the thing with Dante. His past never came as a story. It came as a flinch in the dark. I turned toward the candles to give him room to recover what he clearly wished he had not shown. On the polished step below the altar, wax had dripped and cooled. My shoe slid. The world tilted. His hand closed around my waist before the sound of my breath finished leaving me. That was the first real touch. Not the accidental brush in the study, not the duty-bound weight of a husband on a wedding night that had felt more like a signature than a joining. This was awake, chosen by instinct. His palm warm through wool and silk. My body going absolutely still in surprise. I put my hand on his forearm to steady myself and felt muscle go tight under the coat sleeve. For one suspended second, neither of us moved. Then Dante's gaze dropped to my mouth. Not long, just enough. The almost of it burned through me so fast, I nearly stepped back out of sheer self-preservation. He did the honorable thing first. He loosened his hand. Not fully. Just enough to prove he could. "You need better shoes," he said, voice rougher than before. "I need floors that don't attack without warning." A breath, almost a laugh from him. I stared because I had not known that sound existed. Then the lighter clicked in his pocket. Not in his hand. A nervous habit, maybe, or a scar speaking in metal. He stepped back completely, and the air felt colder where he had been. "There was a meeting location in the ledger," I said, because if I said anything else I would regret being made of skin. "Did you go?" "Yes." "And?" The man waiting there died disappointed. That was the violence in him. Efficient. Closed. Not described. Simply present. My stomach twisted, and he saw that too. "You don't have to like what I do," he said. "No," I whispered, "but I have to know what it costs." For the first time since I had known him, Dante looked at me like I had said something no one in his world ever did. Then he turned toward the door. Rest tonight. Tomorrow you work in the archive again. Is that an order? He looked back once. Yes. He left me in the chapel with the repaired Madonna, the smell of wax, and the ghost of his hand still burning at my waist. I touched the place after he was gone. That was my mistake. Chapter 5. The envelope. What they took to reach me. Pregnancy, I learned, did not arrive alone. It arrived with mornings that smelled too sharp, with a body that no longer felt entirely mine, with sudden exhaustion that turned the archive lamps into interrogation lights by noon. It arrived with the humiliating discovery that paper paste and old vellum, scents I had loved for years, could now turn my stomach if the room stayed too warm. I was standing at the archive table with one hand pressed discreetly under my ribs when Rosa marched in carrying a tray. "Before you faint on the ledgers and cause a diplomatic incident," she said, setting down mint tea and dry toast, "eat." Behind her, Paolo hovered with a notebook in one hand and the look of a man who had already lost an argument. "I told her you needed bland food," he said mournfully. "She accused me of treason against butter." Rosa turned on him. "Because you say bland like it is a moral virtue, it is a medical sentence. It is why no woman has married you." Paolo put a hand to his heart. This from the woman rejecting me in 4 dialects. Rosa's cheeks colored almost imperceptibly. She shoved the toast closer to me. "Eat." For one foolish second I imagined this was a real house. An ordinary one. A place where women argued over kitchens and men complained about diets and no one had buried evidence in burned ledgers. Then Dante came in, and the room remembered what it was. He took in the tray, my face, the gloves on my hands, the open ledger beneath the lamp. His gaze paused one beat too long on the untouched toast. "You should have called Bianca. For nausea?" I asked. "That seems dramatic even for your household," Paolo muttered. "You say that because you haven't seen Bianca with a blood pressure cuff." Dante ignored him. "What did you find?" I slipped the page under raking light. The fire didn't destroy everything. Someone wrote over older entries using gall ink, but pressure marks remained beneath. "And there's a second layer here." I pointed near the bottom margin. "See the sheen?" He moved closer. Too close for thought. Close enough that I caught the cold on his coat from outside, and the darker scent beneath it. I hated that my body knew him before my mind decided what to do with him. "Lemon," I said quietly. "Invisible ink. Cheap, old-fashioned, effective if no one expects it. Tommaso," appearing in the doorway as if summoned by trouble, frowned. "People still do that? People still stab each other over churches and inheritance," I said. "Traditional methods survive." Dante's eyes flicked to my mouth, then back to the page. "Can you raise it?" "Yes." I fetched iodine crystals from the cabinet and set up the small fuming chamber I had improvised that morning from an old glass cloche and a warming plate. Tommaso watched with the respectful suspicion of a man observing either science or witchcraft. Paolo leaned in too far. Rosa dragged him back by the sleeve without taking her eyes off the kettle. Brown gold letters bloomed slowly above the heat. Not a full sentence, just a name. An address. And beneath both, written smaller, "Nico knows. Use him if needed." The room emptied of air. No one spoke for a full second. Then Dante turned his head. "Nico," he said. "Your brother." I could not feel my fingers. My secret had not been pulled from me by courage or confession. The world had simply set it on the table and waited to see who flinched first. "Yes." Tommaso looked at me, then at Dante, and chose the intelligent path of shutting his mouth. Dante's voice stayed level. "Where is he?" I should have lied. I knew that. But there it was again, fear hitting me in the old place, and truth walking out first. "In Palermo." The silence after that felt personal. "You told me he was in Naples," Dante said. "He was. Until 2 months ago. Why move him here?" "Because Naples was where your enemies would look first," I snapped, then heard my own answer and closed my eyes for half a beat. and because I didn't know if telling you about him would make him safer or simply more valuable. Paolo exhaled softly through his teeth. Tommaso looked at the floor. Rosa, bless her savage heart, stood like a stone wall by the tea tray and did not leave me alone in it. Dante said nothing. That silence was worse than anger, because it gave me room to hear myself. To hear what I had admitted out loud, that I had married a man powerful enough to save my brother and still not trusted him with the one person I could not lose. I forced myself to meet his eyes. I took a room for Nico above my old restoration studio under another name. He runs errands for the bookseller on Via Alloro. I send money through Rosa's fish supplier. Rosa lifted one shoulder. Good rates. Paolo stared at her. You're helping hide civilians now? I'm feeding one, she said. Try not to act shocked. It disturbs your digestion. Dante's jaw flexed once. How many people know? Only us, I said. He looked at the blooming words again, then at the address, then back at me. No, he said softly. Not only us. The phone in Tommaso's pocket buzzed. He answered, listened, and went pale beneath the bruise on his jaw. What? Dante asked. Tommaso looked at me first. That was how I knew before he spoke. The boy's room above the studio's been torn apart, he said. Neighbor says 2 men took him 20 minutes ago. I moved before sense returned. Dante caught my wrist before I had cleared the table. Where are you going? To get him. With what army? With whatever I have. His grip tightened just enough to stop me, not enough to bruise. Look at me. I hated that I did. Do you trust me now? He asked. It was the cruelest question anyone had ever put to me because the answer was no, not fully, and still he was the only person in the city who could bring my brother back. I don't know, I whispered. Something changed in his face. Not softness, something sadder, more disciplined. Good, he said. Honest. Little truth. He did not say it aloud, but I heard it anyway. Within minutes, the house became movement. Men with earpieces, jackets, keys, weapons checked without flourish. Tommaso took the front team. Paolo, insulted by being told to stay behind, announced he was too handsome to die in a pantry, and came anyway. Rosa shoved a paper packet into my hand as we reached the courtyard. For the nausea, she said, and for courage. It was candied orange peel dusted in sugar. I nearly cried on the spot. The drive to Via Alloro felt like being dragged behind my own heartbeat. Palermo at dusk was all wet cobblestones and laundry lines between old buildings. The city pretending to be tender while men inside it made other arrangements. Dante sat beside me in the rear of the armored car, saying nothing. His silver lighter clicked once in his hand. Once more. He never lit it. He just let the sound mark time. At the studio, we found the upstairs room wrecked exactly as Tommaso's man had said. Drawers gutted, mattress slashed, window open to the narrow street. But on my old work table downstairs, laid neatly between 2 bone folders, sat an envelope made of handmade rag paper. My name in careful script. I knew the hand, not Nico's. Cesare Leone's. He was Dante's senior advisor. The man who had kissed my forehead at my wedding like he meant it. The man who brought books to the archive when he thought the room was too cold. The man who once told me, gently, that the Salvatore family had needed more women who said no. My stomach turned cold. Inside the envelope was one line only. Ask your husband who taught him mercy. Dante read it over my shoulder without touching me. Behind us, the bells of evening mass began to ring. Tommaso looked from the paper to Dante. Boss? Dante's face emptied in a way I had not seen before. Not rage. Something far more dangerous. The removal of surprise. He's not naming the traitor, Dante said quietly. He's warning me I was supposed to find him already. You think Cesare wrote it? I asked. No, Dante said. That should have comforted me. It didn't, because he looked like a man who had just realized the betrayal was close enough to smell. Chapter 6. The Cannery Road. What he became, keeping me alive. We left Via Alloro with the envelope, and no Nico. That was the worst kind of absence. Not death, not proof, just a space where a person had been, and a city too large to search one door at a time. Dante sent men to the port, the bus stations, the coastal road, the clinics, the abandoned depots his family used when they wanted goods to vanish without paperwork. Tommaso coordinated from the second car. Paolo, in defiance of all human dignity, wore a bulletproof vest under his suit and complained that it made him look like a grieving refrigerator. No one laughed. It was after midnight when the call came. One of Dante's dock guards had found Nico's bracelet, cheap braided leather, one bead missing where I had stepped on it when he was 12, at the old tuna cannery outside Mondello, the same cannery the family had stopped using years ago after a customs scandal and one unpleasant summer involving bodies in brine. "Stay in the car," Dante said when we pulled up. The cannery stood black against the water, its rusted roofline cutting the moon in two. Sea wind pushed the smell of salt, old metal, and rotting nets through the cracked loading bay. Armed men moved in silence around us, boots careful on broken gravel. "My brother is in there." Maybe, that was not a comforting word, it wasn't meant to be. I should have stayed where he put me. I did, for almost 30 seconds. Then gunfire cracked from inside the building, sharp and close, and instinct cut through obedience like wire. I shoved open the car door. Elena. Too late. The first thing I saw was Tommaso dragging one man behind a stack of rusted drums while another fired from the catwalk. The second thing I saw was no sign of Nico anywhere. The third was a glint on the office window above the factory floor. Not moonlight. Glass angle. Scope. Dante. He turned exactly as I pointed. The shot would have taken him through the throat. Instead, it hit the steel beam by his shoulder because he moved on the warning. Men shouted. Another shot cracked. Dante fired once upward without hesitation. The body on the catwalk folded and dropped hard enough to shake rust from the rails. Then all of it happened too fast for fear to stay organized. A man came out of the side office with a knife. Dante met him halfway, caught his wrist, broke it with a flat, efficient movement that made my stomach lurch, and put a bullet in his chest before the scream finished becoming sound. There was no rage in it. That was the terrifying part. He moved like violence was a language he had spoken too long to need emotion for. I backed toward a crate just as another gunman rushed from the shadows near the conveyor line. I grabbed the nearest thing at hand, a heavy brass ledger weight from the office trash pile, absurdly familiar in my grip, and threw it. It struck his temple hard enough to stagger him. Tommaso finished the rest. Elena, down. Paolo yelled, flattening himself behind a forklift with the offended dignity of a man betrayed by architecture. I dropped to one knee behind the crate. Gunpowder burned the air. The sea hammered the outer wall. Somewhere glass shattered. Somewhere a man prayed in Sicilian and was cut off mid-saint. Then Dante was in front of me. He crouched, one hand braced on the crate, the other on my shoulder, checking, counting, taking inventory of damage by touch and sight. His eyes moved over my face, neck, arms. "Are you hit?" "No. Don't lie to me, I'm not." He looked once at the brass weight on the floor, then back at me. "You threw that?" He had a gun. A strange, terrible pride flickered across his face. "Yes." He did. It lasted one heartbeat. Then another shot rang from outside. "Move," Dante said. He hauled me up and half-shielded, half-carried me toward the rear exit as his men finished the sweep. His body stayed between mine and every open line. Mine registered everything despite terror, the iron strength of his arm around my back, the heat of him through my coat, the controlled force with which he moved me without making me feel dragged. At the rear dock, under a single dead floodlight, we found no Nico. Only another message. A child's bracelet on a crate. Beside it, an invoice from Salvatore Shipping, marked with a warehouse number that should not have existed anymore. "It's a ghost inventory code," I said before I could stop myself. Dante looked down. "You know it?" My father used the same masking structure in church donation ledgers when he was hiding gambling debts. He absorbed that in silence. "It maps to a real location if you restore the deleted sequence," I said, breathless, still shaking. The missing numbers aren't random. They're offset by feast days. Tommaso, wiping blood from his temple, stared at me. That is either brilliant or deeply concerning. Both, Paolo said from the doorway. I vote both. We went to a safe house instead of the warehouse. Dante's order. No arguments. No votes. The safe house sat above a shuttered tailor shop in the old quarter, all narrow stairs and blue kitchen tiles and windows barred from the inside. Bianca met us there, furious and efficient. You brought a pregnant woman into an active shooting scene? Dante said, no. She brought herself. Bianca pointed at me. I know. You nearly got yourself killed. I know. She pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. I hate all of you. While she checked me in the back room and confirmed again that the baby seemed fine, I stared at the water stain on the ceiling and realized my hands were still trembling. Not from the gunfire, from Dante's face, when he had reached me behind the crate. I had seen horror there, not strategic calculation, not anger at disobedience. Horror. After Bianca left, I found Dante alone in the kitchen, with blood on his cuff that was not his. The single overhead bulb made the room look too plain for the man standing in it. He had taken off his jacket. His sleeve was rolled where a bullet had grazed the flesh along his forearm. Not serious. Still enough to make my chest go tight. You're hurt. It's nothing. That's a stupid phrase. He leaned one hand on the sink. Then don't use it. I found gauze in Bianca's bag and crossed the room before nerves could stop me. When I reached for his arm, he went very still. You don't have to. Be quiet, I said softly. Just this once. Something almost like surrender moved through him. I cleaned the graze. My fingers shook only a little. He watched my face, not the wound. You should have stayed in the car, he said. You should have explained less by bullets. His mouth twitched, then flattened. I nearly lost you. The truth of it entered the room and stood there between us. I taped the gauze in place, because if I looked up too soon I would do something reckless. You don't get to say things like that after giving me orders all week. What do I get? I lifted my eyes. 1 step separated us. The air felt changed by knowing that. I don't know, I whispered. That's the problem. He lifted a hand, stopped just before touching my cheek, then let it fall. Restraint. Again. The 3rd time it mattered more than a kiss. In the quiet I heard his lighter click once in his pocket. A tell. A fracture line. Dante. It was the truth that caught him first in the study. Not beauty. The way she had stood with fear in her throat, and still answered him plainly. Everyone in his world trimmed themselves around danger. Elena looked it in the face and told it the truth. Then she had done it again tonight, throwing herself into gunfire for her brother and binding his arm with hands that still shook. Little truth, he thought, and this time the name hurt. When I finished the bandage, I didn't step away. Neither did he. I'm not afraid of you, I said, and the next part cost enough that I nearly swallowed it. I'm afraid that when you touch me, I stop knowing which parts of this I can survive. His eyes closed once, briefly, like pain. Then he touched my face, just his fingertips along my jaw. Slow enough to stop, gentle enough to ruin me. Elena, he said, that was all. I rose on instinct more than bravery, and his mouth found mine with a restraint so careful it felt like another form of confession. The kiss was not hunger first, it was wonder dragged through fear. My hand caught in his shirt. His thumb trembled once against my cheekbone before he mastered it. When I leaned closer, he made a rough sound and broke the kiss himself, forehead resting against mine. Not like this, he said. I wanted to ask why. I knew why. Because I was shaking. Because he was bleeding. Because outside the barred window, war was assembling itself around us. He kissed my brow instead. Then Tommaso's phone rang from the other room, and his voice came sharp through the safe house. Boss, he called. 3 warehouses just burned. Vittorio's men are moving. Dante lifted his head. The softness vanished. The man I had kissed stayed. The boss returned over him like armor. War had arrived. Chapter 7. The Harbor Gate, the night I could have left. War, it turned out, was not one loud event. It was accumulation. A car bomb on a side street that shattered windows 3 blocks from the villa. A shipment burned before dawn. A judge suddenly found dead in his garden with no sign of struggle. Men sleeping in clothes because there was no point pretending the night belonged to rest. Rosa cooking for twice the household because fighters ate like grief had hands. Paolo carrying ammunition in crates labeled olive oil, and complaining that if he died doing this, he wanted the priest to mention his cheekbones at the funeral. For 2 days, Nico remained missing. For 2 days, Dante became something colder than anger. He was never absent exactly. He came and went through the villa like weather on a hard coast, leaving orders, maps, names, silence. When he looked at me now, it was with a focus that felt almost unbearable, as if the knowledge of the child and the kiss and the war had aligned into one dangerous obligation. He did not touch me again. That was somehow worse. On the 3rd day, the message arrived in the nursery room. There had never been a nursery, not truly. Just a south-facing guest room Rosa had begun airing out because Bianca suggested sunlight, and because houses like this responded to future heirs before anyone involved was ready. I had gone there to stand in the warm rectangle by the window and imagine nothing at all. The package sat in the middle of the rug. No note, no ribbon, just brown paper and string. My blood turned to ice before I knelt. Inside was one of the tiny wool caps Rosa had bought in defiant secret after Bianca's 2nd visit. Cream-colored, soft, and across the fold, a streak of blood. Not infant blood, Bianca later said. Not enough for that. Probably goat or pig, meant to terrify. It worked. Dante found me sitting on the nursery floor with the cap in my lap, and both hands clamped over my mouth as if fear might crawl in otherwise. He took in the open package, the blood, my face, and became so still the room itself seemed to step back. "Who brought this in?" he asked. No one answered fast enough. When his voice came again, it dropped lower. "Who brought this into my house?" Men appeared in the doorway. Tommaso first, then Paolo, then 2 guards whose names I didn't know. No one looked at the cap. They looked at Dante, which was worse. "I'll find out," Tommaso said. "You already should have." There was no volume in it. Tommaso took the hit anyway, jaw tight. I stood because sitting there felt too much like surrender. Stop. Everyone looked at me. Dante's face changed by less than a degree. "Still enough. This is what they want," I said. "Not the cap. This." I touched my own throat, my own shaking hands, the air full of men waiting for a command brutal enough to reassure them. Dante looked at me for a long time. Then he took the cap from my lap and handed it to Bianca, who had appeared at some point behind the others with murder in her eyes, and medical tape still stuck to one finger. "Test it," he said. To Tommaso, "Lock the inner gates. No deliveries without Paolo." To Paolo, "No one enters the west corridor armed except my detail." Paolo swallowed. "Done." Then Dante looked back at me. "You're leaving tonight." The room tilted. "What?" "Marseille," he said. "Bianca's cousin has a clinic there. Tommaso will take you and the boy when we get him." I stared at him. "You want to send me away now? I want you breathing." That should have felt like care. It did. It also felt like being cut out of my own life with surgical precision. "And you?" "I stay." Of course he did. Men like Dante never fled the houses they built. They died in them or remade them over the bones. Bianca stepped closer. "Elena." "This is the right decision." I laughed once, softly, because it was either that or cry in front of everyone. "For whom?" No one answered. Nico came back an hour later, dumped alive and terrified outside a warehouse near the fish market with a split lip and rope burns on his wrists. They had not beaten him much. That was deliberate too, just enough to prove access. Just enough to let him tell me they had spoken my name and Dante's and the word baby with smiles on their faces. I held him in the infirmary while Bianca checked his pupils and Rosa cursed every living branch of the enemy's family tree. Nico was 19 and still somehow looked 12, when he was frightened. He smelled of warehouse dust and panic and the cheap soap from the boarding room I had chosen, because it reminded me of poorer, simpler days. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. For what? For existing where they could find me. That nearly broke me. By midnight, the harbor road was clear. Tommaso had papers. Bianca had medication. Paolo had packed a bag so comprehensively that I suspected Rosa had done it while insulting his folding technique. The car waited inside the service gate with the engine running. This was the real exit point. I knew it because no one stopped me. Dante stood by the stone arch at the edge of the courtyard, coat on, gun at his back, sea wind moving through the cypress behind him. He had done what a good man would do if he could not be one anywhere else. He had opened the door. Nico climbed into the car first. Bianca touched my elbow. "Elena." I looked at the open rear door, at my brother already inside, at the passport Tommaso had put in my hand under another name, at the thin leather pouch holding the last cash from the sale of my restoration tools. My old life reduced to papers and a route. Then I looked at Dante. He did not come closer. He did not ask me to stay. He did not use power where choice was required. That was what undid me. I crossed the courtyard instead of getting in. Bianca said my name sharply. Paolo made a small strangled noise like a man watching his dinner walk into traffic. Tommaso swore under his breath. None of it mattered. I stopped in front of Dante with the passport still in my hand. "If I leave now," I said, "I spend the rest of my life waiting to hear whether you died here." His face gave nothing. His eyes gave everything. "Elena, no." My voice shook. I let it. I know what your world costs now. I know what it does to children and sisters and men who stop sleeping. I know what it will ask from me if I stay. The sea hit the rocks below the wall hard enough to sound like applause. "I'm still here." His throat moved once. "That is not wisdom. I didn't say it was." Behind me, Nico got out of the car. When I turned, his eyes were red but steady. "You should go with her," I told him. He looked at Dante, then back at me. "And you?" I swallowed. I don't think I belong to the version of my life that leaves anymore. That cost me. I felt it leave. I put the false passport into Bianca's hand. My fingers shook. Then I took the studio key from my pocket, the last key to the last room that had been only mine, and pressed it into Nico's palm. "Take whatever's left," I said. "Sell it. Start somewhere no one says our name like it means debt. Elena, go." He hugged me so hard I lost my breath. When he stepped back, there were tears on his face and salt in the air, and the terrible, clean knowledge that I had just chosen this darkness with my eyes open. Bianca got into the car with him. Tommaso shut the door. Paolo, passing me on his way to the front seat, whispered, "For the record, I hate brave people. They ruin transport logistics." A laugh escaped me in spite of everything. It came out broken. The gate opened. The car rolled away toward the harbor road. I stood there until the taillights disappeared. Then Dante took one step closer, not enough to claim, only enough to acknowledge. "You stayed," he said. "Yes." His silver lighter clicked once in his pocket. This time it sounded less like warning, more like a vow. Chapter 8. The Wine Cellar. The Man Who Taught Him. I lasted 6 hours after choosing to stay before someone proved how expensive the choice was. By morning, the villa had become a fortress stripped for war. Men on the walls. Radios murmuring. Gates checked twice. Tommaso ran on black coffee and stubbornness with a fresh bandage under his shirt, where a bullet had grazed him at the harbor checkpoint before dawn. He brushed off concern with such determined profanity that even Rosa gave up and added more salt to his eggs instead of sympathy. I was in the archive room because fear became more bearable when placed beside objects older than it. The restored Madonna stood on the top shelf now, gold seam catching the lamp. I liked having her there. She reminded me that damage admitted could sometimes hold. Cesare Leone found me just before noon. He came in with a tray himself, which should have warned me. Men of his age and rank did not carry their own coffee unless they wanted something from the room more than they wanted appearances. Cesare was silver-haired, elegant, soft-voiced in a way that made people lower theirs in return. He had known Dante since childhood. He had once brought me a first-edition prayer book because he remembered I liked marginalia. "Elena," he said warmly. "You look tired." "I feel hunted," I answered. He set down the tray. "That, sadly, is accurate. I should have been more careful. But betrayal rarely arrives in a stranger's face. It arrives wearing familiarity." He asked after Nico, after Bianca, after whether the archive heat was too much in my condition. The concern was so perfectly measured that if there had not already been an envelope in my old studio, I might have relaxed. Then he said, "Dante is at the lower warehouse with Tommaso. He sent me to move you somewhere safer until the house is cleared." The lie was almost flawless. Almost. Dante never sent messages through anyone when it came to me now. Not after the nursery. Not after the harbor gate. If he wanted me moved, he came himself or sent Paolo, because Paolo talked too much to conceal fear. I stood very still. "Where's Paolo?" I asked. Cesare's expression did not flicker. "With the outer detail?" Another good answer. Perhaps the best one. Still, the back of my neck went cold. His gaze dropped to my hands, to the bone folder I had been using on a warped ledger page. "Bring your coat," he said gently. "We haven't much time." That was the mistake. Not the words. The tone, too paternal, too certain I would obey, because he had always been the safe elder in a house of dangerous men. I set down the folder, and reached instead for the glass bottle of wheat starch solvent near the lamp. "If Dante wants me moved," I said, "he can tell me himself." For the first time, Cesare's face emptied, not into rage, into disappointment. "I was hoping," he said, "you would make this easier." The needle went into my neck before I turned fully. Fast. Professional. Someone had been behind me all along. The archive lamps slid into streaks of white. When I woke, the room smelled of damp stone, cork, and old wine. The cellar, not the working one beneath Rose's kitchen. The older cellar cut into the foundation rock below the east wing, where bottles older than the Republic slept behind locked iron gates, and family business sometimes went to die in private. My wrists were tied to the arms of a chair with nylon cord. My mouth was dry. My head felt packed with wool. Cesare sat opposite me with a single lamp between us and a ledger on his knee. No mask now. No performance of concern. "You frightened him at the harbor," he said. I swallowed against the taste of chemicals. "Good." His expression softened with something that might, in another life, have been pity. "That is exactly the problem." A chill moved through me that had nothing to do with stone. "You sent the blood cap?" "Yes." "You took Nico?" "Yes." The honesty was obscene. "Why?" "Because Dante has forgotten the first law of our world." I laughed once, raw. "That babies deserve death?" His jaw tightened. "That weakness invites it. Lucia. The chapel. Broken things. Buried." I stared at him. "You were there." His silence confirmed more than words would have. "When his sister died," I whispered. "You were there." Cesare looked down at the ledger on his knee. Old leather. Salvatore crest on the cover. She was 19. In love with a policeman's son. Pregnant. The commission had already marked the house as soft. Vittorio wanted a correction. The name hit like a bell. Vittorio Salvatore. Dante's uncle. Rarely seen. Always obeyed in older stories as if he belonged to the generation that had taught men to confuse fear with respect. "You let them kill her. I let the family survive, no," I said, because truth was the only thing left that felt like mine. "You let a girl die so powerful men could call themselves necessary." Something flared across his face then. Grief. Shame. Anger that had learned to dress itself as doctrine. "I taught Dante discipline," he said. "I taught him how not to drown in sentiment. And now look at him. One wife, one unborn child, one honest gaze from a woman who doesn't know what we are, and the whole empire starts bending around a heartbeat." There it was. The mirror in him. Not pure evil. Worse. Belief sharpened by past cowardice until it looked like principle. Footsteps sounded beyond the iron gate. Cesare's man brought in a phone, held it out. Cesare answered, listened, and inclined his head. Yes, he said. She understands. He held the phone toward me on speaker. A man's voice came through. Older. Cultured. Cold. Elena, Vittorio said, as if we had met over supper. You are not the target, strictly speaking, merely the lesson. If Dante wants wife and child, he will surrender the port books and his seat. If he refuses, Cesare knows what must be done. My fear became very still. You speak like a priest, I said, for a man asking someone else to murder a pregnant woman. The soft breath on the line might have been amusement. No, I speak like family. The call ended. Cesare studied me for a moment. You should not have stayed. Neither should you. He looked genuinely tired then. Perhaps. When he left to take another call, he made the mistake of leaving the tray from upstairs on the barrel beside me. Coffee untouched. Napkin. Small knife for slicing cheese. My wrists were tied too tight for strength. But nylon hated solvent. I tipped the bottle with my bound fingers. It shattered on the stone. The sharp starch sour smell rose at once. I dragged the cord through the spreading liquid, sawing against the chair arm, skin burning with it. The knot softened fraction by fraction. Above me, somewhere in the house, an alarm started. Not the fire bell, the east corridor breach alarm. Good. I tore one hand free. Then I took the cheese knife, cut the other cord, and stood just as the cellar door opened again. Cesare returned. He saw the broken bottle, the loose cord, the knife in my hand, and smiled sadly, like a man watching a prophecy confirm itself. I told him, he said, you were the wrong woman to underestimate. The first shot sounded overhead. The second came closer. Chapter 9. The Bell Tower. What he broke open for me. The first thing I did was throw the lamp, not at Cesare, at the wine rack behind him. Glass exploded. Darkness surged up with the smell of alcohol and flame because old cellars are full of mistakes waiting for fire. Cesare swore and turned his face away just long enough for me to drive the chair into his knees. He went down hard. The cheese knife was ridiculous in my hand. Barely a blade at all. But fear gives objects strange dignity. I ran. The cellar stairs were narrow, worn smooth at the center by generations of feet carrying either celebration or secrets. Alarms wailed through the stone. Men shouted above. Smoke followed me where the lamp had caught spilled spirits and decided to become a real problem. At the top landing, I hit the wrong corridor first. Locked iron. Back. Left. Up again. My lungs burned. One hand clamped over my stomach on instinct, absurd and helpless and animal. Then someone grabbed my arm. I almost screamed. Don't, Paolo whispered. If you scream, I'll scream, and then we'll both be useless. He looked wild. Soot on one cheek. Tie gone. Gun in hand. Behind him, Rosa stood in house slippers and an apron with a shotgun braced against her shoulder like vengeance had finally found a domestic form. I stared. Paolo shrugged breathlessly. Turns out love makes people operational. Rosa kicked open the service door. Move. I did. We took the back servant's stair while gunfire cracked through the grand hall. Paolo hustled me ahead of him, muttering to himself the way nervous saints probably did. Left. Head down. No, lower than that. Signora, with respect, your survival posture needs work. Rosa, if I die, tell my mother I almost had abs. Rosa said, if you die, I'll tell her you were brave. He looked wounded. That's not the same as handsome. We reached the old bell tower passage above the chapel just as two of Vittorio's men burst through the lower corridor. Rosa fired first. Paolo second. I had never heard a shotgun indoors before. It sounded like the building itself rejecting trespass. Up, Paolo said. There's no exit up. There is if you're rich enough. That was the most Paolo thing he had ever said. He shoved me through the tower door, bolted it behind us, and dragged an old chest across the threshold while Rosa reloaded with terrifying calm. The bell rope hung down the center of the stairwell like something from another century. Through the narrow slats I could see the sea, bruised gray under afternoon clouds, and the front drive crowded with men and vehicles. No Dante. My chest folded in on itself. Paolo saw it. His voice softened for the first time since I had known him. "He's here. How do you know?" Because the man downstairs called him by his first name and sounded afraid. Gunfire answered from the courtyard. Then footsteps. Heavy. Fast. Not panicked. Final. The tower door shook once under a body hitting it from the other side. "Paolo," Dante's voice said. The relief was so violent it made my knees weak. Paolo yanked the chest aside and opened the door just as Dante came through with Tommaso behind him, both of them blood-spattered and breathing hard. Tommaso had a fresh bandage darkening at the shoulder. Dante's face looked carved from the part of grief that comes after fear has already done its work. He saw me. Everything in him stopped. Then he crossed the space and put both hands on my face like he had reached shore after drowning. He did not ask if I was all right. He looked, counted, confirmed. His forehead touched mine once, hard and brief, almost a collision. The reunion was wordless because there were no words big enough for what had almost happened. My fingers caught in his shirt front. "Cesare." His eyes changed. "I know," he said. Tommaso closed the tower shutters while Rosa, incredibly, straightened Paolo's collar with one irritated swipe. "You're bleeding," Rosa told Paolo. Paolo looked down at his sleeve, surprised. "Ah, dramatic then." "You idiot." His face lit despite the smoke and bullets and near death. "You noticed?" Dante had not stepped back from me. One hand remained at the back of my neck, not possessive. Anchoring. I did not move away. He said Vittorio wants your seat, and the port books, I told him. He said Lucia. I stopped because Dante's whole body went rigid at the name. Tommaso went still too. Paolo looked suddenly older. "You know," I said quietly. "Yes," Dante answered. That one word held a grave inside it. Down in the courtyard, engines cut off. A car door opened. Men shifted with the alert silence of predators scenting a larger predator. Dante released my neck slowly and crossed to the slit window. "Who?" Tommaso asked. Dante's voice came back colder than the stone walls. "Vittorio." We all moved to the window in different shapes of dread. Vittorio Salvatore stood beside a black sedan in a charcoal coat, silver hair immaculate, one gloved hand resting on a cane he did not appear to need. Even at a distance he looked like old authority made flesh. Cesare stood half a pace behind him with blood on his cuff and no sign of shame. The sight of them together explained too much at once. Vittorio lifted his face toward the tower as if he knew precisely where we were. Then he raised one hand and tapped 2 fingers to his temple in a mock salute. A messenger came through the inner gate waving white cloth. Paolo made a disgusted sound. I hate theatrical people. Tommaso took the note from the messenger, read it, and handed it to Dante. Dante read without expression. Then he passed it to me. Family crypt. Midnight. Bring the ledgers. Bring no police. Choose who carries the future. My hand shook only once. Dante took the note back and tore it neatly in 2. "No," I said. Everyone looked at me. "You're going," I said to him. "Yes, then I am too." His gaze locked on mine. "No, I got myself out of the cellar. I know. I heard the call. I know what he wants. And if this ends in a room where old men decide what women and children are worth, I will not be absent again." The silence after that was very nearly a living thing. Dante came back to me, slower this time, tired in the bones now, not just the face. He touched my cheek with the back of his knuckles. The gentlest thing I had felt all day. "Little truth," he said. Warmer. It undid me more than the rescue had. Outside, thunder rolled in over the sea. Inside the tower, smoke and incense and gun oil mixed into one terrible perfume of this life I had chosen. Dante lowered his hand. "One of us might not come back from the crypt," he said. No one argued. because now we all knew it too. Chapter 10. The family crypt, it is over. The Salvatore family crypt sat beneath the chapel like a threat that had learned stone. I had walked above it before without knowing. Attended Mass in the little private chapel, repaired the Madonna, nearly fallen on the waxed stair. Under all that holiness lay a chamber lined with marble niches and the dead who had built the family name out of shipping contracts, smuggling lanes, and enough blood to make prayers sound practical. Midnight made the air there cold enough to bite. Dante did not win the argument about my presence. Not because he gave in. Because I came prepared. While Tommaso assembled men and Paolo complained that no one respected a tactical retreat when it was really excellent judgment, I laid the restored ledger pages and the hidden entries across the archive table, and did what I knew how to do. I made paper tell the truth. The invisible notes in the shipping books, once developed fully, tied Vittorio's ghost inventories to the judge's death, the cannery ambush, the nursery package, and a series of older transfers dating back to the year Lucia died. Cesare's initials appeared beside 3 authorizations. Not enough for court. More than enough for capos who still pretended there were lines. When Dante came in, fastening his cuff with one hand, I slid the folder toward him. "You fight with guns," I said. "I fight with records." His eyes moved over the pages, then up to me. Something like astonishment passed through him and stayed. "This will split the council. That's the point." He took the folder. "You were supposed to have a quiet life with books. I had one. Men ruined it. A breath, almost a smile, then gone." The crypt itself was lit by low wall lamps and dozens of votive candles left from the feast of St. Rosalia. Their flames turned the marble names gold and restless. Vittorio stood at the far end before the central sarcophagus, cane in hand, Cesare at his side. 3 armed men flanked them. Dante brought only Tommaso, Paolo, and me visible, though I knew more waited above in the chapel shadows, because Dante Salvatore did not arrive to die politely. "You brought her," Vittorio said, disappointed rather than surprised. "Elena goes where she chooses," Dante answered. I felt Vittorio's gaze on me then, measuring, and that is precisely the problem with the modern world. Paolo muttered under his breath, I would shoot him just for the sentence structure. No one smiled. Dante held out the folder. "Your accounts." Vittorio did not take it. "Keep them. The books matter less than the principle." "Say principle again," I said, before fear could ask permission. "It seems to make murder easier in your mouth." Cesare closed his eyes briefly. Vittorio's gaze sharpened. "You sound like Lucia." The name cracked the room open. Dante moved half a step before stilling himself with visible force. "Do not." But Vittorio was old-school cruel, the kind that mistook emotional precision for wisdom. "She thought love exempted her from consequence," he said. "A policeman's bastard in her belly and tears in her eyes." Cesare understood necessity. Your father understood it. You were the only one sentimental enough to call it betrayal. I turned to Cesare. He did not defend himself. That was somehow worse. "You watched her die," I said. His voice came low and frayed. "I watched because I told myself one death would save many." "And did it?" For the first time, the old man looked destroyed by his own answer. "No." That was the mirror. Not evil untouched by regret. Evil built from compromise until it became identity. Dante's face had gone utterly still, the kind of stillness that precedes a breaking point. "Here is what happens now," Vittorio said. "You yield the ports. The wife is sent away. The child, if there is one, becomes a private family matter. Order returns." "No," Dante said. Vittorio sighed as if disappointed by a nephew's table manners. Then Cesare. Cesare drew first. Not on me. On Dante. The shot cracked through the crypt like lightning under stone. Tommaso moved on instinct and took it high through the shoulder, slamming back against a tomb niche with a strangled curse. Then, everything detonated. Gunfire. Marble chips. Paolo swearing vivid prayers while dragging Tommaso behind the sarcophagus. Dante firing twice, dropping Vittorio's right-hand man and blowing the cane from Vittorio's grip. I hit the floor hard enough to bruise and crawled toward Tommaso as blood spread hot and black through his shirt. Pressure, he gritted out through clenched teeth. I know. I pressed both hands to the wound. My palms slipped immediately. Tommaso laughed once, strangled and unbelieving. Boss's wife doing battlefield first aid. I'm not surviving this with dignity. You were never going to. Across the crypt, Cesare and Dante had become movement and history colliding. No speeches. No grand declarations. Just two men who knew each other's instincts too well. Cesare fired. Dante closed distance. They hit the base of the central tomb hard enough to knock candles to the floor. Vittorio came toward me then with a backup pistol in his hand and hatred finally visible on his composed old face. Move, Paolo shouted. I couldn't. Tommaso was bleeding under my hands. So I did the only thing left. I grabbed the fallen brass lamp beside the niche and threw it at Vittorio's feet. Oil spread. Flame caught his trouser cuff. He stumbled, swore, and fired wild. The bullet struck the marble above us. Paolo, God bless his dramatics, used the opening to shoot Vittorio clean through the chest. The old man looked stunned more than wounded, as if death were bad etiquette. Then, he fell. At the center tomb, Cesare had Dante's gun wrist trapped and a knife in his other hand. Dante took the blade through the side rather than let it reach farther. I heard my own scream and hated it for being useless. Then Dante did something terrible. He let Cesare see his face. Not rage, not hatred. Grief. Lucia was your child too, he said. Cesare stopped. Only for a second. Long enough. Dante drove the knife home under his ribs and held him there while the old man's strength went out of him. Cesare looked down, then back up at the boy he had helped make into this. Whatever apology he had left never reached his mouth. When he fell, something in Dante went with him. The chapel bells above began to ring. Not by plan, by impact perhaps, by men running, by heaven finally deciding to witness. Afterward came the honest part. Bianca on the crypt floor with Tommaso. Hands sure, voice hard. Paolo sitting down abruptly beside a tomb and saying, "If anyone tells Rosa I cried, I will deny all facial moisture." Rosa arriving with a kitchen towel and enough fury to sterilize the dead. Vittorio covered. Cesare covered. Dante standing apart with blood on his hands and no visible idea what to do with surviving. I went to him. He looked at me like a man just returned from somewhere uninhabitable. "It's over," I said. He closed his eyes once, opened them again. This time he believed me. It was over. Chapter 11. The archive window. Choose me this time. After war, the house sounded wrong. Too quiet in some places. Too loud in others. Men no longer ran the corridors. They conferred in low voices that kept breaking on the fact of who was missing. Vittorio's faction folded faster than I expected once Dante released the ledgers to the council. Old loyalties, it turned out, were often just fear wearing a family crest. Without Vittorio standing in the room, several capos rediscovered conscience with astonishing speed. Tommaso lived. The bullet had missed the artery by what Bianca described as the width of one of Paolo's useful thoughts. Tommaso, pale and furious in recovery, claimed this proved he was impossible to kill, and immediately tried to sit up. Rosa threatened to staple him to the mattress with kitchen skewers. He wisely reclined again. Paolo began bringing flowers to the infirmary every morning, loudly insisting they were for morale, and not because Rosa liked peonies and pretended not to. On the fourth day, I passed the open door and heard him say, with solemn dignity, "If I'm going to love a woman who thinks butter is a sacrament, I need support." Rosa replied, "Eat your soup." He sounded near tears. "Is that yes?" "It's soup." I left before the laugh gave me away. Dante moved through the aftermath like a man carrying invisible weight in both hands. He did what leadership required. Meetings, funerals, money shifted, routes redrawn, men reassigned, whispers crushed. But there was a new quiet in him that had nothing to do with control. Cesare's death had not freed him cleanly. It had taken something. A final illusion, perhaps, that loyalty and harm were always different houses. A week after the crypt, I found him in the archive room after sunset. Of course it was the archive room. Grief and truth both seemed to end up there now. The tall window was open a crack to the sea air. Lamps burned low. The restored Madonna watched from the shelf. Dante stood with one hand braced on the table, the other holding his silver lighter closed in his fist so tightly the knuckles had gone pale. He looked up when I entered but said nothing. I crossed to him slowly. Tommaso says you haven't slept. Tommaso talks too much after morphine. That wasn't a denial. A faint, tired breath left him. Not amusement exactly. Closer than usual. I stopped at the opposite side of the table. You saved the house, no. His eyes dropped briefly to my stomach, where the smallest curve had finally begun to exist. I saved what was left. The distinction hurt because it was true. He set the lighter down and opened a drawer. From it he took a folded document and placed it between us. I looked down. Annulment papers. My breath caught. Dante watched my face with a stillness that meant the act had cost him already. The marriage contract was coercion disguised as solution. Your brother's debts are gone. The council has ratified the port succession. If you want your name back, I'll see it done quietly. For 1 second I could not feel the room. This was not romance. Not flowers. Not a man on one knee in a garden pretending blood had never happened. This was the most dangerous thing he had given me since the harbor gate. Choice. You want me to leave, I said. No. The answer came too fast. Too bare. His jaw flexed. He forced himself on. I want you free enough that staying means something. Something broke open in me then. Soft and painful and past speech for a moment. You think I stayed because I couldn't go? I think, he said carefully, I have spent most of my life taking responsibility for damage after it's already done. I would like, once, to do better before. I stared at the annulment papers until the words blurred. Then I looked up. You don't know me at all, I whispered. A shadow crossed his face. That may be true. No, I stepped closer. Because if you did, you would know I am offended by paperwork as a love language. His mouth actually moved this time. A real, brief, stunned smile that made him look younger and more dangerous, and almost unbearably human. I came around the table. He did not touch me. Even now, even after all of it, he waited. I chose to stay when there was a car at the gate, I said. I chose to stay after the nursery package. I chose to stay when I knew what Cesare had done and what killing him would do to you. Do you really think a stack of legal documents is going to frighten me into reconsidering? His eyes had gone dark in that quiet way they did when feeling got too close to the surface. Elena, I put my hand over the papers, then tore them cleanly in half. The sound startled us both. There, I said, suddenly shaking. Now you can stop pretending I haven't been choosing you this whole time. For a heartbeat, he just looked at me. Then he reached up and touched the underside of my wrist, where the pulse leaped under skin. So little contact. Enough to remake weather. Little truth, he said. This time the nickname held no edge at all. I cried then, which annoyed me because I had meant to be brave and articulate, and instead became entirely made of water. He crossed the last distance at once, hands framing my face, thumbs catching tears before they could fall properly. I don't know how to give you ordinary, he said. The confession landed in the room like something holy. I leaned into his palms. Then give me honest. His eyes closed. When they opened again, there was no boss in them for a second. Just the man beneath the suit and the gun and the terrible education of his life. Stay with me, he said. Not because you must. Because this is where you want to wake up. I laughed through the tears. That was almost a proposal. It was exactly one. It was not very pretty. No. Good. His forehead touched mine. Then, finally, he kissed me the way a future is kissed when it has already survived the fire. Slow. Warm. No blood in the room, no alarms, no interruption except the sea beyond the window and Paolo's distant voice somewhere in the hall shouting, Rosa, if this broth is affection, I accept your terms. I smiled against Dante's mouth. He breathed the shape of it in. When he drew back, his hand slid down to cover the small curve of my stomach, with reverence so quiet it hurt. Outside, the evening settled over Palermo like a truce no one entirely trusted. Inside, for one fragile, ordinary minute, we did. Chapter 12. The nursery lamp, the sound it became. 9 months later, the house sounded different. Not safer. I had stopped confusing those words. But different, yes. There were still armed men at the gates. Still coded calls after midnight. Still meetings in rooms where old sins wore new ties. Palermo had not turned innocent because Dante Salvatore learned how to hold his daughter. The world remained what it was. The radical thing was that love existed inside it anyway, and did not apologize for surviving. Her name was Lucia. I had resisted at first. Not because it was wrong. Because it was too heavy. Too full of grief not originally mine. Then one night I watched Dante stand over the crib, while our newborn slept with one fist beside her cheek like a tiny boxer, and I saw what naming could be when done honestly. Not replacement. Not absolution. Witness. So Lucia she became. She was 3 months old on the night the lighter sounded like home. The nursery window stood cracked to the sea. A storm gathered over the water, making the curtains breathe in and out. Rosa had sewn stars onto the lampshade because apparently our daughter required celestial endorsement. Paolo insisted the mobile above the crib hung crooked. Rosa said his face hung crooked, and yet society persevered. Tommaso, now fully recovered and even more insufferable for it, had brought Lucia a silver rattle shaped like a lion, and claimed it was tasteful intimidation. I was laughing about that when Dante came in. He had loosened his tie but not removed it, which meant the meeting downstairs had gone long and nobody had dared mention it. He paused in the doorway the way he always did now, as if he still needed visual proof that the room existed. That I existed. That the child in the crib was not another thing the world could rewrite if he glanced away. His gaze found me in the rocking chair beside the crib, one sock half finished in my lap because Rosa had decided hand-knit things were how respectable women processed trauma. I was terrible at it. The sock looked like a wounded turnip. "You're home late," I said softly. Counsel ran long. That means Paolo talked too much. A brief curve touched his mouth. That is always true. As if summoned by slander, Paolo's voice floated up the corridor beyond the nursery door. I heard that. And for the record, Rosa said if I keep stealing olives before dinner, I'll die alone, which is the closest thing to courtship I've had all week. Rosa answered from farther down the hall, "If you speak outside the baby's door again, I'll speed the process." I laughed under my breath. Dante's eyes rested on my face as if the sound still surprised him sometimes. Lucia made a small, sleepy noise in the crib. Instantly we both turned. That was marriage, I had learned. Not the church, not the signatures, not even the vow you made in a room full of witnesses. It was this. Two people moving toward the same fragile thing, without needing to discuss it first. Dante crossed to the crib. His large hand settled on the mattress edge, not touching her yet, simply assuring himself she was still there. Our daughter had his dark hair in a softer shade and my mouth, which I hoped would save her and feared might damn her in equal measure. She sighed, fists unclenching, and went back to sleep. The storm outside finally broke. Rain tapped the window. The nursery lamp flickered once and died. For one beat the room went dark, except for the line of lightning over the sea. Then I heard it. The clean silver click of Dante's lighter. In Chapter 1, that sound had turned my blood cold outside a locked study door. Now it bloomed in the dark like a second heartbeat. He thumbed the flame alive, shielded it with one hand, and lit the candle on the nursery shelf beneath Rosa's ridiculous sewn stars. Warm gold filled the room again, gentler than electricity. Lucia slept through it. I watched the flame catch and realized the sound no longer meant warning to me. It meant he was here. Dante set the lighter beside the candle and looked back at me. What is it? There it was. The same old question in a different house. In his world, most people still offered him manageable answers. Measured ones. Safe ones. I loved him too much now to lie well. Sometimes, I said. I still hear those 6 words before I hear anything else. He went very still. I had never learned how to tell the truth in portions. Not with him. Not in the beginning. Not now. When I wake in the dark, I said quietly, there are nights I remember the study door before I remember the crypt or the harbor or this room. I remember being 4 weeks pregnant and thinking the man I married might decide whether our baby lived. Rain traced the glass. Somewhere below, the front gate opened for a late car and shut again with its usual iron finality. Dante came to stand in front of me, not reaching yet, taking the words as they were given. I know, he said. No defense. No request for mercy. I looked up at him through the candlelight. I believe you now. I know what you were doing. I know who you were baiting and why. But belief isn't the same as forgetting. His throat moved once. No, he said. It isn't. For a second, neither of us spoke. Lucia breathed softly in the crib. The storm passed its hands over the roof. Then he knelt in front of me. Not dramatic, not grand. Just a man lowering himself to meet the truth where it was. Little truth, he said, and the name held every version of us inside it. The cold first use, the chapel, the safe house, the harbor gate, the archive window. All of it. Do you know why it was you? I thought I did. Not fully. Never fully. But enough to be afraid of the answer. No. His gaze stayed on mine. In my world, everyone survives by editing themselves around me. They lower their eyes. They soften facts. They give me the version that costs them least. He paused, the candlelight catching the scar at his thumb. You never did. Even afraid, you told me the truth straight to my face. The room seemed to narrow around those words. In the study, he said. At dinner. In the archive. At the harbor. Tonight. You keep doing it. I swallowed hard. It gets me into trouble. It cost me, he said, voice roughening for the first time. The man I was able to be before you. The one who could survive anything by feeling less. That landed so deep I had to look away for a second, or break open completely. When I looked back, he had not moved. I don't want that man back, I whispered. Something in his face gave way then. Not composure. Something older. Lonelier. He took my bad knitted sock from my lap, looked at it once with solemn respect and said, This is catastrophic. A laugh burst out of me so suddenly Lucia startled in the crib. Dante rose at once and lifted her with a competence that still amazed me, settling her against his chest with one broad hand spanning nearly her whole back. She blinked at him once, decided he was acceptable, and tucked her face under his chin. I watched them and felt the world tilt into something unbearably ordinary. Dante. She still told him the truth, when it hurt her to say it, when it hurt him to hear it, when silence would have been kinder and less brave, holding their daughter, watching his wife in the rocking chair with candlelight on her face and a ruined sock in her lap. He understood what that honesty had done to him from the first day. It had not made him softer. It had made him answerable. He sat on the arm of the chair and passed Lucia carefully into my arms. Then his hand came up to my cheek, warm and known. We can't promise her a clean world, I said. No, or a harmless father. His mouth shifted with something like pain and something like humor. Probably not. I looked down at Lucia's dark head, then back at him. Then we give her this. No lies inside the house. Not about what the world is. Not about what we are. Not about what love costs. Dante's hand stayed on my face. Yes, he said. It wasn't a romantic word. It was better. It was a building material. Below us, Paolo yelped. Rosa said, Stop opening pots you weren't invited into. Tommaso's laugh followed, low and alive. The house, this impossible, blood-marked, stubborn house, breathed around us with all its damage acknowledged and still standing. Dante bent and kissed Lucia's hair first, then mine. When he reached for the silver lighter again, I watched his thumb press it open. Flame. Click. Gold. The same small sound that had once made me stop breathing, now settled into my bones like shelter. I leaned into him, our daughter warm between us, the storm moving out over the sea. And this time, when the lighter clicked, it meant home. Some nights, I still wonder what our love will cost Lucia for having been born inside it. That question never quite goes quiet. So tell me this. If you had been me, would you have chosen Dante and this dangerous life, knowing innocence never survives unchanged?